The Let Kashmir Decide movement is bringing to you a brand new show on JKTV where you will get the latest updates and analysis into the situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir.
Modi and the Indian government want the world to believe that all is well in Indian-occupied Kashmir, but that is decidedly not the case. Join us and different guests every Thursday for insight into the latest developments in the Kashmiri freedom struggle.
Good evening. Welcome to Let Kashmir Decide. Insight into censorship tonight in Indian-occupied Kashmir. It's becoming, of course, of increasing concern. You know, every message or voice that is trying to come out is being squashed. It's not just in Indian-occupied Kashmir, it's also outside Indian-occupied Kashmir. So we're looking at it in our mainstream media, in Indian-occupied Kashmir and outside, and on social media. And we're aware that people can't even post on their Facebook pages without fear of having their phone checked in Kashmir, and then, you know, being issued furs on them. And having to come along to police stations over things like that. Facebook accounts are being closed, and it's of huge concern. How are we to grow a movement, a freedom movement, and stand in solidarity with humanity and people if we are being stopped at every way? This freedom of voice and this freedom of movement is completely unacceptable. So Mary will be joining us a little later in the show, but just now I've got Mizan Raymond with me, so I'll bring him in. Grateful for him tonight, for joining us, an activist in the UK. Good evening to you, Mizan. How are you?
Claire, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm very good, thank you. I've got my solidarity here.
Great. Unfortunately, I'm fasting, so I can't have any tea yet. So we'll be breaking fast.
I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said that.
No problem.
In spirit.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah. We'll break up.
And hopefully Mary will join us. Yeah, Mary will join us shortly, and she can get into the questioning. Perhaps while we're waiting for Mary to arrive, can you tell us a little bit about you, Mizan, who you are, where you're from, what you do, and your road into political activism, and where you currently are with the activism? Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So I'm just like a normal campaigner in London. I was born and bred in the UK. I think, to be honest with you, like the politics of the war on terror and just not being educated about what was going on around the world in our, via our education systems, these kind of things just left me really, really disillusioned about the system that we are living in. And I remember, like, in my teenage years, I remember feeling like I'm going through some sort of a conveyor belt. It's like, the education system wants to wants to make you in a way that way you can end up with the job, but not really enlightened in regards to what's going on around the world and how the system works. And I just remember feeling this void, by going through the education system. And I think one of the things that really, really just sparked my interest was the start of the second Intifada and 9/11. I remember those things really, really just sparked an interest in regards to there is things going on around the world, and we're not being we're not being told the truth. And this kind of feeling is still there. It's like I can still access it when I think about it. It's still very raw. And what I decided to do was basically just, I kind of came into the realization that, the system, they're not really going to teach us about what's going on around the world. So you have to independently learn about what's going on around the world. So I started reading a lot of books, from left-wing perspectives, your Chomsky's, etc. And that kind of really empowered me because I felt as though I was getting the education that I wanted. And obviously, I'm condensing everything down here, but that led me on to political campaigning, obviously campaigning in Palestine, the arms trade, etc. And what got me involved in Kashmir, even though I knew about the Kashmiri issue for a number of years now, I know some young activists or Kashmiri activists themselves. I remember taking part in one event in 2014 in Trafalgar Square where I had to read out some poetry from Kashmiris themselves in Trafalgar Square, and that kind of made me read a lot about Kashmir. But what really got me involved was, the thing that is the thing that a lot of people seem to love to hate, which is the Labour Party, basically. So in my local area, I was involved in the local Labour Party, especially under under the Jeremy Corbyn years, and we have a lot of right wing. We have a lot of right wing councillors who are like Hindu nationalists as well. So the issue of Kashmir was very much very important. And I remember like trying to talk about Kashmir to certain councillors and stuff like that. We were told not to talk about it at all. So when the election actually happened, my MP Bob Blackman, he used the issue of Kashmir, he used the issue of he really played up to the Hindutva identity to really garner the votes. So Kashmir was very important. And I remember when we were going on the doorstep, a lot of families were like, we don't really like, Labour's position on Kashmir. Now you have to understand, Labour's position on Kashmir was the internationally recognized position, which is a plebiscite, which is like giving Kashmiris the right to, have a say in their own future. And this is something that Jeremy Corbyn himself stands by, and at least he publicly came out and said, especially when you had over 100, right-wing Hindu organizations send him a letter basically arguing the case, or arguing for their position on Kashmir. Jeremy Corbyn responded back by saying that the Labour Party is an internationalist party, and basically his position is the plebiscite, basically. So the issue of Kashmir was very important, and that kind of motivated me to get more involved in the issue of Kashmir. So, finding out more about the Kashmiri solidarity movement in the UK, getting involved in a lot of these groups. And I think one of the things that, made me see how where the direction that the Indian that the Modi government was taking things in was the actual taking away the special status of Kashmir in 2019, and seeing the lockdown of communications in Kashmir, in Indian occupied Kashmir, especially where you had people, they couldn't use the landlines and stuff for a long time, for a while. But also when I was involved in a lot of these groups, one of the things I come to realize is that, especially when it comes to people who come from Kashmir, who have family in Kashmir, hearing stories of their families being raided and stuff like that, that really kind of, motivated me even more. And obviously that's via those circles. That's how I got to find out about you, Claire. So, and about Let Kashmir Decide. So the thing is that's a kind of like really, I'm kind of giving you a shortened version of how I got involved in this and where we are today. But, it's a very important issue. And I think when it comes to the issue of Kashmir, and especially the issue of the Modi regime, they are learning a lot from other kind of states. So, for example, the Israeli state, they're learning a lot in terms of how to respond to criticism. And one of the things I think is very important is that under the Corbyn years, we had the opportunity to elect a leader who was very much with the Palestinian people. He was branded an anti-Semite by a whole host of organizations, and I think that's what the Modi government is learning from that, because now what happened was under the Corbyn years, especially on his view on Kashmir, the Labour Party was seen as anti-Hindu, and this was actually promoted by Bob Blackman, and you had a host of these kind of pro-Israeli organizations promoting the same thing as well, like the Labour Party is a Hindu-phobic party, etc., etc. So again, there is this fusion, that there is this connection there where they're learning from one another, and I think if it's not good, it's very dangerous.
And it is, isn't it? It's about them spinning their narratives. I mean, one of the things I've learned in my, campaigning, and very much like you, it's from the heart, and therefore you go looking for where you can and you see the blocks. And I think you've covered it really well. One of the things I've learned is that India, as a country, they don't like to be perceived as bad. They're actually quite fragile in their ego. They want to be seen as good. And I can see that as a little bit of a chink in their armor, because it's a country that wants to be seen good. That's an angle for us to try and go in, because as we've said before, we're not anti anybody,
Yeah.
just pro Kashmiris, pro Palestinians, for their freedom, for what the people want. I think the frustration, isn't it, in Indian occupied Kashmir, is that so much atrocities, so many abuses going on. It's like you say, when you draw it individual story, you bring it down to the one person, it's heartbreaking. And then what we're seeing then is, the censorship in Indian occupied Kashmir right now with the journalists and things like that. So that's what we're kind of wanting to look at tonight and discuss. So for the first question and insight into that, what are you aware of, Mizan, that's happening in Indian occupied Kashmir with the journalists just now, or human rights, or anybody that's trying to raise their voice?
Well, in any occupied situation, it's very difficult to get information out. Even though it's a bit more harder now, let's not forget, even before the removal of the special status, it was still kind of difficult to get information out in regards to what is going on in Kashmir. Obviously, now you have the issue of journalists, basically people like Sajjad Shah and other people who basically are trying to do some reporting on Kashmir on the ground level. And basically, they are being harassed by police. They are being, questioned. The houses are being raided. And this is very important, because one thing we have to understand is that when you want to maintain an occupation, information, especially about, critical information from the grassroots, this is something that you don't want to come out. And you don't want the international community to be educated upon, because the people who know what it's like to live under your occupation are those people under your control. So, when it comes to the Kashmiris in Indian occupied Kashmir, any information about their lived experiences and any information about their opinion, and information about what they think, that kind of serves to actually break the narrative that the occupier is trying to maintain and uphold. And this is very dangerous, because this kind of serves as a first step towards ending the occupation, is to get the information out in regards to how, in regards to the lived realities of people in those situations. And journalists play a very, very important role in doing that, because they can get the information out. So basically, you have a system in place where journalists are self-censoring right now. It was very difficult for that to be done before, but now it's made even more difficult due to the removal of the special status, and also the crackdown of the Modi regime in Indian occupied Kashmir, where you have people being raided by police, questioned by police, harassed, even sometimes, fear of physical threats, physical assaults, and all these kind of things, family members as well being targeted, and all these kind of things. These serve to actually really ensure that there's a kind of a mechanism of self-censorship, because these stories about what's going on the grassroots level, and it doesn't have to be anything related to Kashmir, but anything that's happening on the grassroots level in Kashmir is not really reported on. You have stories of journalists basically stopping, not writing on certain angles, on certain pieces, because they're afraid about what's going to happen. And also, let's not forget about the financial situation as well. Living in an occupied territory, when it comes to journalism, at the end of the day, journalism is a business as well. And therefore, the finances really, or the lack of finances, really cause an additional strain and cause they can impact on one's mental health, because at the end of the day, journalists, they have to pay the bills. When it comes to media organizations, they need finances to run. And one of the things that the Indian government has done is to make sure that when it comes to the finances of a media company in Kashmir, they're kind of reliant on government advertising. And obviously, when it comes to media organizations that are calling for the rights of the Kashmiri people, they're not going to get. They don't want government advertising from the Indian government, who goes against that kind of self-determination. So their finances are very much hit as well, and therefore you kind of see the media ecology is not really sustained because of the lack of finances, and therefore this kind of adds to the obstacles, the various obstacles that journalists have towards in order to kind of not just write stories about what's going on in Kashmir, but basically present them to the whole world as well. So there's a whole host of obstacles when it comes to journalism in Kashmir. It happened before the Modi regime. It's happening. It's got even worse during the Modi regime. And if this issue is not if this issue is not resolved soon, if the at least if the Kashmiri people don't have the right to a plebiscite and they don't have that, they don't have their say, it's going to happen after the Modi regime as well. And therefore, you know, it's important to find out about these things. You know, it kind of brings about the whole importance of journalism itself, because journalism itself is very much under attack everywhere. You know, in Palestine, Kashmir, going back to, for example, Al Jazeera, for example, when you had Al Jazeera doing their reporting on Iraq, for example, their headquarters was bombed. So, you know, all these kind of things, journalism is very much important. But it's not just just about those companies reporting within conflict zones as well. When you have people from outside trying to create more awareness about what's going on, you have their Facebooks targeted, you have their profiles closed down, you have their links removed, but also you have the fact that when you have events that happen outside of the conflict zone. So, for example, I remember attending an event in SOAS on the issue of Indian Kashmir. You have pro-right-wing Hindu organizations and individuals come and sabotage the whole event and these kind of things. So, you know, there's an attack from within and outside as well, which we need to challenge. And one of the things that we can do and we should continue to do is to continue to create more awareness, continue to talk about it, continue to host these events and host these shows online to ensure that the narrative of Kashmir still goes on, and basically that they won't win, basically, because
absolutely. Yeah, well said. And we can save some of that discussion for the end into how we can go forward. Good evening to you, Mary. How are you?
Hi, Mary.
Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, that's my fault. Hang on.
The time mixed up because we have daylight savings time.
Right.
So I thought I had another hour. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're looking very fresh and awake, Mary. It's lovely to see you. You've got a cheer to my day.
Yeah. Lovely to meet you.
Yeah. What we've learned about Mizan in the show so far, Mary, and I'll do it in a nutshell for Mary Mizan, a from the heart campaigner, aware through his schooling days that we were on this treadmill and looking for more than he was being shown. He's a very well-read, learned man, Palestinian activist, and then became aware of the Kashmir issue during the lockdown and has worked through that. And, you know, as we're saying, these are exactly who we're wanting to connect with. Everybody, you know, we're all of that ilk. And so it's a pleasure to be having this conversation.
Yes.
We've looked at his background and he's given us then a little bit of that. And the first question we were exploring was the media in Kashmir. Mary, could you give us a little bit of an update, please, on the current, you know, journalists in jail and the FERS and what are against them? And then perhaps forward, if you take the discussion forward with Mizan, I think we could look deeper at the second question you had lined up, Mary, I think around Facebook or YouTube or things like that, where we are challenged.
Well, you know, what I'm observing is that beside these very prominent arrests like Sajjad Gul and Fahad Shah, I noticed that journalists are outside the country. Those prominent journalists who would be targeted, who would be arrested, who would be jailed, many of them have left the country, I think advisably. Why would you stick around waiting for them to stick you in one of their jails in India when you should leave the country and you could still do work in some regard? It's not that easy.
Even few of them have FERS in their head, don't they? Yeah, some really good journalists, and they're hidden into ground, really.
Yes, or they're doing pictures of scenic pictures and things, because if they do anything political, they're banned from covering these CASO operations, these military operations. They're banned and assaulted and arrested if they do. And so really, they don't have much choice if they don't want to end up in jail. So I've been thinking a lot recently about how we need to really think out this campaign about the defense of these journalists and other human rights activists like Karim Parvez, Yasser Malik, and several others, some of whom have been rotting in jail for years, that we really need to, in this news period of news of telecommunications blackout, we really need to focus on that campaign of really think out how we're going to do that. Maybe you could comment on that, Ms. Honor. I just in a few minutes, I see you have a lot to say.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to the whole issue of journalists, we're living in a time where it's, journalism itself is very much under attack. And it has been, it's something that's been a thorn in the side of dictatorships and tyrants for a very long time. But unfortunately, when it comes to nowadays, I think, like for me, especially in the West, the case, for example, the case of Julian Assange is a very, very important case because it just shows where critical journalism is going. And unfortunately, if that door is closed, if that, if that happens to him, then every other journalist around the whole world, in the West and in the East, is pretty much targeted. But that's been going on in Kashmir and other occupied territories anyway. I think one of the things we can do is support organizations like Journalists Without Borders and all these other organizations that support journalists in these conflict zones. And also when it comes to the issue of, for example, whistleblowing, this is something that's very important that we don't really talk about as well, because whistleblowers have played a very, very important role in supplying information to journalists for them to print in the newspapers and stuff. So it's really important that the Kashmiris, when it comes to the issue of Kashmir, we highlight the experiences of journalists and basically place them within these global campaigns of free speech and of protecting the rights of journalists as well, because these organizations can also add extra pressure to ensure that, for example, the Indian government does what it is stipulated to do, to look after and ensure that journalists are not targeted. Because when it comes to free speech, they say that they value free speech as well. But how do they value free speech when you're targeting the very first people on the front lines, which is the journalists itself? So when it comes to the issue of Yasser Malik or Sajjad Ghul or other people, ensuring that their campaigns, ensuring that their names are taken up by human rights organizations, by organizations that kind of the campaign for journalists and things like that, to make sure that their names are taken up, is very, very important, and something that I think we can do as a first step towards ensuring that journalists are protected in Kashmir and everywhere else around the world as well.
I wondered if you could talk about, I noticed that there's never been a lot of mainstream media coverage about Kashmir. There isn't about Palestine. There isn't a lot of coverage about that. And now that Modi has put this telecommunications lockdown, really, there's even less coverage. The New York Times has actually done some relatively good coverage on it in the past, especially around the 2019 when they took over colonial control. But I wonder if you could talk about that whole question of mainstream media simply blacking out news of the Kashmiri freedom struggle or what's going on there. My own suspicion is it has a lot to do with the alliances, military and trade alliances with India. But I would like if you would give us some of your insights about that.
I personally think, there's that angle to it as well. But I also think that is something, you know, it's about a group of people that live somewhere else. Therefore, you know, it's about basically South Asians, people who are not white, people who don't speak English, and therefore it's something that happens somewhere else. And therefore, you know, that's one of the reasons why the media doesn't really cover it that much. There is no connection between the West and what's going on over there, but there is a connection in terms of when you're looking at the trade deals that happen between, you know, India and Western countries, the military agreements, the weapons transfers as well. And one of the things we have to understand is that when it comes to an occupation, there, however you look at it, you know, Western companies, you know, mega corporations in the West are involved somehow. Financial organizations, they're involved somehow. You know, when, you know, these occupations are sustained by mega corporations, they're sustained by arms trades, they're sustained by securitization. So they go through a system, they go through the global system, and therefore there is this symbiotic relationship between the West, you know, and that part of the world. But I do think that the reason why it's not, one of the reasons why it's not covered is because, you know, when it comes to the people that are being occupied, they're you know, they're not white, they're not English speaking, and they're not near us in any way. And therefore, the media doesn't really cover it that much. Whereas if you look at what happened in Ukraine, not only does the media cover it, but our government is giving away £350 to anyone that kind of takes in a Ukrainian refugee. So, you know, there's a night and day difference. But along with that, there is this whole issue about, you know, the fact that, you know, there's a lot of organizations that are working in cahoots with one another. And India, when it comes to its occupation of, you know, Indian occupied Kashmir, you know, it does look towards other states. It does look towards other states to see what they do. So, for example, Israel and other countries as well. So, you know, that is very, very important. Unfortunately, when it comes to the system of occupation, we all know it's wrong. We all know occupying other people is wrong. On the international stage, at least there is this verbal understanding that occupying people is wrong. Unfortunately, that's not really what's in practice, and that's not really what, you know. And when it comes to the role of the media, by not covering the stories, and not just not covering the stories, but not giving the context behind these stories, you know, they are playing a role in maintaining these occupations as well. So therefore, the media does have a role. And the global media is fused in with these same multinational corporations that are sustaining these occupations. So therefore, there is an interest in not covering certain occupations and covering other occupations. But unfortunately, when it comes to the issue of Kashmir, there are these issues, but also at the same time, this is in relation to a people who don't speak English, who are not white, who are not European, who are not the Western people, and therefore it's of, in terms of a racial, when it comes to the issue of racism, it's not really of the interest of the Western media to actually cover what's going on in Kashmir. The only way that will change when, you know, once, you know, by us carrying on doing what we are doing, by campaigning, by lobbying. And this is the thing, because I'm not sure if Claire told you, Mary, but because of Jeremy Corbyn, because of him doing what he done, like really coming out and telling his position on the issue of Kashmir, the former leader of the Labour Party, and by him rebuffing a lot of these right-wing Hindu organizations, the issue of Kashmir did come into the media a little bit. And that's what happened in our area. The issue of Kashmir was an issue. So again, like, by people playing their part, by mainstream politicians playing their part, the part that they should play in mainstreaming the issue of Kashmir, we can force Kashmir on the mainstream media agenda. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened due to several reasons, including reasons of, you know, of corporations basically maintaining ties with the military in India, and also this issue of racism, because of the fact that the people that are occupied aren't white, aren't from the West. I think these issues, amongst other issues, play a role in the West in ensuring that it does not cover the issue of Kashmir.
That's interesting. I wondered if you could talk about this new propaganda film, the Kashmir Files. And the
Right.
reason I wanted to ask about it is because the war on terror ideology, India has always used that against Kashmir, the Kashmiri freedom struggle. And of course, I think it was pioneered against the Palestinians. But now it is really a major ideological weapon to justify war and occupation. And all the governments use it. China, the United States, all of Europe, Russia, India. And so, but it never really took off against the Rohingya or against Kashmiris. But this film, the Kashmir Files, in fact, really creates that whole narrative for Kashmir. And I think that presents problems for us. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that. You don't have to talk about the film so much, but about how they're going to use that narrative against the Kashmiri people.
Well, what's interesting is that this crackdown on journalists, one of the reasons given by the Modi regime to crack down on journalists and what's going on in Kashmir is to quote unquote stop the spreading of fake news, right? It's to stop these stories which they consider to be fake news, again, which is something that was mainstreamed by Donald Trump, to stop these from being printed. But at the same time, here you have a major film that really promotes a narrative that is what a lot of people consider to be fake, right? So in terms of the pundits, you know, even though there was violence going on, that we're not going to lie about that, but you know, the issue of, you know, what happened to them was of migration and not of genocide. But unfortunately, what's being promoted by the film is one that says that, you know, this was a genocide, which is the narrative promoted by the Modi regime to actually oppose the Kashmiri liberation struggle. And this whole narrative fits in within the wider context of the war on terror, because the war on terror was really set up with the premise that, you know, when it comes to Muslim political activism or Muslim political kind of, you know, in this case, a reaction to political violence, the lives and the narratives and the perspectives of the Muslim community is really demonized. And this is something that has been normalized ever since the war on terror started. So as you've just said, like the war on terror narrative, but also the way that, you know, the West kind of deals with Muslim communities has been exported throughout the whole world. So when it comes to China, you know, you have the British government going over to China, to the Chinese government and advising them on how to deal with the Uyghurs. And obviously this is something that the Modi government is trying to capitalize on. And unfortunately, there has been, because of the fact that the war on terror has basically been able to mainstream this idea that when it comes to Muslim political activism or when it comes to Muslim issues, you know, there is something inherently problematic. And therefore there has been, let's just say on the ground, there has been some level of acceptance for this film, you know, the Kashmiri Files. And this is very important because when it comes to the Modi regime, let's not forget Modi's his own kind of participation and his own role in the Gujarat massacres that happened when he was basically governor, right? When he was basically in charge of the state of Gujarat during that time. That happened in 2002 during this whole time as well. And therefore, the issue of the Kashmiri Files, kind of the narrative of it sits within this whole perspective of the war on terror, that there's something inherently problematic about Muslim communities, and Muslim lives are valued less. And therefore, it kind of sits within this whole Islamophobic industry. But unfortunately now what's happening is that you have a whole mainstream media, the Bollywood industry, which is a huge industry involved in this whole issue now. And you have not just the industry, but you now have, let's just say, actors coming out saying that they support the Kashmiri files. They believe the same thing as well. But it's not much of a surprise, because this kind of reminded me of what I think there were quite a few kind of actors involved in the Bollywood industry who have made comments in the past about, you know, what they believe to be kind of Indian nationalism and their kind of Hindutva kind of ideologies, which showed that there is some form of there are some Islamophobic ideas that they themselves harbored, but they did not have the opportunity to say until right now. So this is the thing. You have this whole, when it comes to the war on terror, it kind of legitimized, you know, anti-Muslim sentiment, anti-Muslim feelings, but also anti-Muslim power structures that really gave rise and created a fertile hotbed for kind of films like the Kashmir Files to basically find a foundation on and find some support from. And unfortunately, this is not just in India, but in the West. You have the UAE actually giving the green light to the Kashmir Files as well.
Can I jump in there, Mizan, because I'm mindful of the time, and I know you need to leave us in 3 minutes. I want to just pull up there. You know, you're right. There's a couple of comments somebody's made on the screen that I don't think are really very helpful. I think the people, you can't just say that British people are inherently racist. That's the wrong thing to say, because you know, my background, my family weren't racist. And so to the person on the screen, we're talking about this to get action. We hear all comments, freedom of speech for everybody. And we're seeing that the hierarchy is not helpful. But we're here trying to work on that and make a difference. One of my concerns, I'll come back to you, Namizan, sorry. One of my concerns with the Kashmiri Files is, you say, laying this foundation. One of the big foundation concerns, you see Malik starts his trial, I think it's the 18th of April. And, you know, the fear is they're using this film for their pity, for their, you know, to get that hatred, so that when you see Malik comes for trial, they're more justified in the world's eyes. And that's just one example. So it's really important. You know, we know we've got our own ground to see Malik's signature campaign. That's why we're talking to share news like this. Anybody can get on the ground with that signature campaign. It's on Let Kashmir Decide website. Mizan himself hosted a program on political prisoners in Kashmir. That work is still out there, and we're needing support of people around the world. So if you're here just listening, then you also can please act. So Mizan, sorry to put that back to you. You wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just want to quickly say, so that question, we were not saying that, obviously, we're not saying anything in relation to Western people being racist. What we were saying was that the media, the mainstream media, I think one of the reasons is that it has no interest in covering the issue of Kashmir, you know, properly, because of not because of the fact that it has connections with organizations that have an interest in.
No, it's something somebody said on the screen, Mizan. It's in the comments. Yeah. It's not yours.
Yeah,
it's not your comments. It was somebody else.
I want to make it clear to that person. Yeah. The reason why I said what I said is because one of the reasons is because the media is connected to organizations that have an interest in occupations, especially in Indian occupied Kashmir. But because of the people that are being occupied are not Western, I think there's another reason why the Western media doesn't really cover properly what's going on in Kashmir. I'm not saying that Western people are racist, they're not, but the system itself has no interest in it because of these factors and other factors as well. So I hope that clarifies a lot of things.
Yeah. Yes. You know what I think I would like to do is, this is a good
say that there's racism.
I think, Mary, what I would like to do, we need to let Mizan go, but I would quite like to. Mizan, are you free in a fortnight to do a part 2 with this, and we'll take this on further, because there's still the dipping into the SODIA and the resolutions and where we can go with that? How would you feel about that?
We have a lot more to ask you. I have a lot more questions, especially knowing that you are also a Palestinian activist, a solidarity activist, and I think there needs to be a collaboration between these two struggles. So yes, we have a lot more that we would like to talk to you about.
Okay,
I'll be Mizan, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll let you go. I know you needed to go.
thank you so much for having me, and it's been a great show. I'm definitely looking forward to working with you guys in the future. Claire, I'll work with you anyway, so that's great.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we'll see you
part 2.
Same time in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks. Okay, I got it. Got it. No problem. Take care, okay?
I'll see you before then, hopefully. But yeah, thanks, Misan. Bye, bye.
It was great meeting you, by the way.
You too. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, Mary, that, you know, is clear, we're making this program tonight on JKTV. This channel is not allowed in Indian occupied Kashmir. It's not allowed in India. It's been censored. It's been stopped by the Indian government that went for the court, you know, went to court to get that stopped. You know, so they don't want the people of Kashmir seeing these dialogues, these talks and everything. We know your Facebook is banned also in India, and you know, you share neutral, legitimate, evidence-backed comments, and they're scared of that as well. So they're obviously clearly scared of the truth. I think when we're talking about media and movement, we're talking about discussing the truth, aren't we? And essentially, India is silencing the truth.
Yes.
Yeah. Anything further you want to add to this evening, or shall we round that up there and look at our solutions? Ask people to comment.
He was a very, very interesting analyst, so I really look forward to talking to him again. I'm sorry I missed the first part of it, but my time was all messed up.
That's okay. It happens. We're living in a real world, Mary. These things happen. So, okay, if anybody has any questions, thoughts, comments, please leave them on the Facebook or the YouTube comment pages, and we can discuss them in here 2 weeks. It's such a vast topic. You know, we have to bash through the censorship. Now, obviously, we've got our Facebook pages, all social media platforms, but we also need to bring it to the ground. And how we find our way through to the mainstream media is a crucial part of this, because we are looking at, although, as Misan said, our media here, it's about, well, it's happening over there and it's not happening to us and it's not relevant, but it's very relevant to our world when it's humans that are suffering. And we're, you know, the West is living in advantage of this suffering. Our wages are paying the weapons that damage these people, that keep them the way. We're used as a pawn in this game, and that's why it's really important. We've said before, it's about life, living on earth, and how we live our life. And that's why it's important we all stand up and speak and do something about this, and whatever we can in the Kashmir freedom struggle, as is inherent and just and right. So thank you, Mary. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks. And thank you for everybody that joined us tonight. Keep sharing the word, keep talking about Kashmir. Please follow us on all the platforms, anything to share, tag us in your posts. And, you know, we've just got to keep letting people know. And hopefully you'll join us on the 5th of May for our solidarity again, and let's grow it even bigger. So we think we reached about 100,000 people on the 5th of April, Mary. So it's growing. It's growing. So keep supporting people and let us know how we can raise your voices, how we can raise the Kashmiri voices out and beat this censorship. Okay, thank you so much and good night.
Good night. See you later.